Good morning. This is Susan, and I will be reading the New Bedford Light for November 20th. The top story is Commuter Rail ridership surges with South Coast Rail. And there's a nice big picture of a train. Commuter rail ridership in southeast Massachusetts has surged since South Coast Rail service began in March. On average, riders are taking 2,000 more trips each day on the MBTA's Fall River New Bedford line than they did last year when the route was the Middleborough Lakeville line. The new trips amount to a 33% increase in ridership along the line, even as ridership across the MBTA commuter rail network overall decreased by 6%. I think it's awesome, said Seth Kaplan, a transit advocate with the Boston-based group Transit Matters. There's a demand there for people who once had transit to have it restored to them. The Light's analysis was based on MBTA ridership data from April through September compared to the same period in 2024. If the 2,000 new daily trips are coming mainly from South Coast riders, that would exceed previous estimates that the extension would generate 1,600 new daily trips. We want ridership to be as high as possible, given the investment the state made in this infrastructure, said Chris Dempsey, a transit advocate who served as the state's Assistant Secretary of Transportation under Governor Deval Patrick. 2,000 per day is a respectable and encouraging number. The long-awaited South Coast Rail extension added 6 new stations to the MBTA network, bringing passenger rail back to the region for the first time since 1958. Local leaders celebrated the extension as a way to connect residents to better jobs and schools to the north, as well as another way to attract tourists to the South Coast. The latest ridership data offers some insights into how riders are using the service. Who's taking the tea? Local museums and business owners told the Light this spring that they saw an uptick in Bostonian visitors, but the data suggests that commuting workers rather than leisure travelers make up most of the increased ridership. Weekday ridership increased by 36%, while weekend ridership increased by only 13%. Ridership on Memorial Day, Independence Day, and Labor Day, federal holidays, when many workers have the day off, looked more like what you'd see on a typical weekend day. Even as peak tourism season ended, ridership remained at roughly the same levels through the fall. The recent data only shows ridership on the Fall River New Bedford line as a whole. It doesn't show exactly how many people are going to or from the new South Coast stations. Is it helping traffic? At the South Coast Rail kickoff celebration on March 24, Governor Maura Healey touted the project's benefit for drivers. It's going to help with traffic congestion, which is something we've made a priority, she said. We want shorter commute times for both train riders and car drivers. A state environmental analysis from 2017 predicted that the project would shift some commutes from roads to rails, resulting in a reduction of 66,400 vehicle miles traveled each day. That's equivalent to eliminating roughly 600 daily round-trip commutes between New Bedford and Boston. But there's no sign the trains have taken a significant number of cars off the roads between the South Coast and Boston, according to the Light's analysis of state traffic data. Freeway traffic on Route 24 and Route 140 is about the same as last year. That didn't surprise transit advocates. The reality is, as much as we wish transit service would solve congestion, that alone is not sufficient, said Dempsey, the former Patrick administration official. The promise of less traffic on Route 24 may have been overstated, Dempsey said. He noted a concept in transportation called induced demand. When government tries to relieve congestion by building a new road or train line, this can actually encourage more people to travel, resulting in more traffic and the same amount of congestion. Traffic data isn't perfect. A spokesperson for the Massachusetts Department of Transportation cautioned that traffic counts along this corridor are limited and any findings from those counts would be inconclusive. With that in mind, here's what the data shows. A traffic counter on Route 24, just south of the Harrison Boulevard exit in Avon, logged a slight increase in traffic during the past several months compared to the same time last year. The average number of cars passing the counter each day increased 2%. Another traffic counter on 140 in Freetown showed a 1% increase in traffic. The counter showed traffic was down by 2% in October compared to the previous year. It probably didn't have anything to do with South Coast Rail. Early MBTA data for October doesn't show an increase in train riders compared to the previous month. It's possible that ramp closures for the I-195 Route 18 interchange replacement could have a ripple effect on Route 140 traffic. Street style. New Bedford photographer Andrew Kopinski explores the whaling city to document fashion as it happens. Liv Dunks. I try to wear a feeling and accessorize the hell out of it. Liv Dunks. Age. Old enough. Where are you from and where do you live now? From Bermuda, currently living in South Dartmouth. Occupation. Musician, writer, poet, dreamer, emotional philanthropist. Favorite hobby, cooking and eating. Describe your style for us. Skate park mob wife. What are you wearing? I try to wear a feeling and accessorize the hell out of it. When I'm going out, I like to wear something that feels laid back and powerful. I'm a believer of the philosophy, look good, feel good. I like to drag my feet around in platform docks. I'm grounded by their weight. Socks are a fun and sometimes ignored way to put some flair in it. I found these green flames at Vans. Good jeans make a difference in any look. The skirt I'm flirting with is from Mother Denim. They have really fun stuff. My little shirt from O'Neill is a cute gift from my Mitch. We were in Martha's Vineyard this summer, and he said to me, "You got to have this shirt. It matches half my wardrobe," so he was totally right. The jacket was a Christmas gift from my mom that I wore to a Ty Segall show in April, and he said it was cool, so I call this jacket the Ty Segall Likes My Jacket jacket. What articles of clothing do you repeatedly wear? All my jewelry. I feel very odd and naked without it. How does your style fit into your way of life? I try to keep it fun, and playing with aesthetics is fun. We only have so many days on this earth, so why not play around? What's your favorite season for fashion and why? I love layers and coats. The more patterns and colors and textures I can wear, the better. So I have a sweet spot for fall and spring. Who are your primary influences when it comes to fashion style? I lived in New York City for 10 years and got so much inspiration from the people on the street. Also, I go to a lot of shows and buy a lot of merch from bands, and so half my style is band tees. Waterfront. Inspector General uncovers grossly mismanaged Pope's Island Marina. An investigation by the state's Inspector General found that Pope's Island Marina was and is grossly mismanaged by the New Bedford Port Authority and the state's Department of Conservation and Recreation, called DCR. Decades of rental payments and operating fees at the publicly owned and operated docks are unaccounted for, while the Port Authority and DCR also failed to provide a full accounting of $190,000 that was set aside for capital repairs between 1997 and 2003. To this day, neither party has signed a lease agreement, which the Inspector General found was not consistent with the law. And since 2016, the rent paid by the New Bedford Port Authority, which operates the marina, to DCR, which leases the site, is less than what it paid in 2000, which should have been DCR's wake-up call, according to a report released on Tuesday. The Inspector General concluded that the local Port Authority has not demonstrated that it has the resources to properly maintain the marina, while stating that DCR has not demonstrated it is a good steward of public assets. Gordon Carr, Executive Director of the New Bedford Port Authority, said in an email statement that he was still reviewing the Inspector General's report, also known as the IG, the Inspector General. What is immediately clear is that the findings concerning the NBPA are fundamentally flawed, Carr said. Remarkably, the Office of the Inspector General, OIG, failed to conduct any interviews with NBPA personnel at all, We look forward to providing a comprehensive response to the OIG report, which we will make available to the public. Spokespeople for the DCR did not immediately respond to requests for comment on Tuesday. The investigation was spurred by an initial 2023 complaint that the Port Authority was not making payments. The IG's report states that additional complaints were filed in later 23 and 24. One of these complaints suggested that the Commonwealth would transfer the marina to the city of New Bedford without following the necessary legislative procedures to transfer public assets. The IG's report largely substantiates these complaints, including that the Port Authority and state agency were writing special use permits and memorandums of understanding in place of a formal lease document, even though the law requires a signed lease for operating this site. Overall, the scathing report is the latest blow to the management of New Bedford's publicly owned waterfront assets. Already, the state pier adjacent to downtown has removed multiple tenants owing to years of neglected renovations and repairs. Pope's Island, the largest of the small islands between New Bedford and Fairhaven, is also home to fishing vessels, marine repair shops, restaurants, and a playground. The report focuses only on the marina, which is operated by the Port Authority and used primarily by pleasure crafts. The marina faces south towards the harbor and hurricane barrier. As for next steps, the IG recommends a course of action for several of the involved parties, including the New Bedford Port Authority, DCR, and the legislature. These include terminating the current special use permit and negotiating a lease document that includes controls on collecting rent, implementing regular financial record keeping and proper contract administration, and seeking an outside audit of revenues, write-offs, and accounts receivable at all state-owned properties. State House. Legislature revisits bills to criminalize sexual misconduct by school staff. The state remains one of 11 nationwide that does not prohibit sexual misconduct between staff and students who are 16 and 17 years old. After years of stalled attempts, Massachusetts lawmakers are inching closer to passing a bill that would prohibit sexual relationships between school staff and students as young as 16. The state remains one of 11 nationwide that does not criminalize sexual misconduct between staff and students who are 16 and 17 years old. For more than a decade, legislators have filed bills to address the issue, but none have become law. Now, a pair of bills moving through the House and Senate are leaving some advocates and legislators hopeful for their passage. Recently, a bill filed by Senator Joan Lovely, D. Salem, saw progress in the Senate. It would raise the age of consent to 18 in cases involving adults in positions of trust or authority, address the definition of position of trust or authority, and amend sentencing procedures. Lovely said she hopes it will fix what advocates call the consent loophole in the state. There is no statute that penalizes relationships between consenting age students and adults working in school. Advocates say this creates a way for employees to groom young teens and initiate a sexual relationship once they reach 16, the legal age of consent in Massachusetts. People say, it can't be my favorite teacher or my favorite coach or my favorite priest or my favorite friend, whoever it might be, and years later they find out that it was. And so for this particular bill, we want to stop that in its tracks, said Lovely. The bill was reported favorably out of the Senate Judiciary Committee in July and is awaiting review by the Senate Ways and Means Committee. Senator Michael Rodriguez of Westport, who chairs the committee, did not respond to the Light's 3 requests for comments on the bill's future. Lovely, who has been filing similar legislation since 2015, said she is optimistic that her efforts are working, even if it is taking time to convince her colleagues of the urgency of the topic. Last session, an identical version of this bill failed to become law. Some advocates and legislators worry that could happen again this session. Senator Mark Montigny of New Bedford, a co-sponsor of Lovely's bill, said in an email to The Light that while he is encouraged by the favorable committee report, there is still a tremendous amount of work that must be done to break through the inexcusable inertia on Beacon Hill. I will continue to support this bill and Senator Lovely's efforts to deliver it to the governor's desk, which should have happened years ago. For over a year, Jennifer Cullen has been walking the halls of the State House on some of her days off, hoping to find a legislative ear. She said it has been very difficult to get state representatives to speak to her. It has made her wonder, how important do they think this is? Cullen's nephew, Jacob Pothier, was killed in a car crash in January 24. Kathleen Martins, who was also in the car, was critically injured. Pothier was 18 and Martins was 44. Martins had been a security guard at Greater New Bedford Regional Vocational Technical High School, while Pothier was a Voc Tech student. They were involved in a sexual relationship, according to Pothier's relatives, who believe it started when he was 16. There needs to be some real reform with this bill, said Cullen. My nephew was 8 years old when this issue came into consideration. I don't know if it would have changed him being dead, but he could have been protected. Cullen also said the bill needs teeth. Passing the bill should be a priority, she said, but it needs to cover a more specific range of protections and consequences to make it easier to enforce. Offshore wind. Federal judge asks if Trump pause on offshore wind has an end date. Massachusetts sued the Trump administration in May to end its wind power freeze. 10 months in, is there an end in sight? Boston. Attorneys from Massachusetts and the federal government returned to court Tuesday to argue again over whether President Donald Trump's memo freezing all offshore wind permitting should be vacated, a freeze going on 10 months with no end date, per the latest information shared with the judge. Judge Patty B. Saris took over for Judge William G. Young, who could no longer take the case for personal reasons, said Saris during a status conference last week. Saris requested the parties present oral arguments Tuesday to help her get up to speed. During the status conference last week, Saris said she wants to know if the comprehensive assessment of wind projects has an end date. The Trump wind memo, issued on January 20th, his first day in office, also called for a project-wide assessment of offshore wind. The review is still pending. 10 months in, is there an end in sight? Saris asked Tuesday. We do not anticipate an end date yet, replied U.S. Department of Justice Attorney Michael Robertson. But part of that is because just the voluminous nature of review that's going on. He later called the freeze a temporary pause. I suppose the word temporary is in the eye of the beholder, Saris said. I've seen these reviews of government, and sometimes it takes 3 or 4 years to do these regulatory processes. That was true under the Biden administration, too. That's what was frustrating to the people who wanted the oil and gas leases. It is indefinite and long, not temporary in any normal sense of the word. Robertson said there is action happening with the project-wide review. Agencies are consulting with their own agencies, and NOAA has sent a robust set of materials to the Interior Department, he said. He gave an unclear description about when NOAA had sent the materials, stating that it was before the U.S. Senate made its appropriations at the end of September. An Interior spokesperson on Tuesday declined to answer questions about materials sent, stating it does not comment on litigation. A NOAA spokesperson in an email Tuesday said the information provided to the Interior was a scientific record of events from NOAA career scientists that was recorded prior to the Trump administration. As another example of activity, Robertson cited a secretarial order from July that directed an assistant secretary to, within 45 days, submit a report to Interior Secretary Douglas Burgum consistent with the wind memo that describes and provides recommendations on the impact of wind on birds, mammals, fisheries, economic costs, and military readiness. Interior did not immediately respond as to whether or when that report was received by Burgum. The Light has submitted a Freedom of Information Act request for the report. Massachusetts Deputy Attorney General Turner Smith cast doubt on it. We've heard nothing about that report. There's no sign of it as far as we can tell. There is no hope that permits will be issued, said Smith. There is no timeline for this comprehensive assessment. We're here at 10 months and counting, and the government has achieved its objective by putting a stoppage across board, said James Auslander, attorney for the Intervenor Party Alliance for Clean Energy, New York. He stated that the federal government is banking on the judicial process taking a long time. Audio connection cut out for about 5 minutes during the hearing, but from the information the Light heard and a draft transcript it reviewed, some of which is quoted, Robertson provided no end date for the project-wide review. Since September, not much has changed, argued the states. Neither the states nor the federal government filed new information for Saris to review. Massachusetts and more than a dozen other states are asking Saris to rule that Trump's wind memo is illegal and vacate it. Without resolution to this case, wind developers and states currently negotiating contracts to purchase project power are left with significant uncertainty that can derail such agreements. For South Coast Wind, which has featured a prominent voice in the lawsuit, and the only developer voice, is looking at a December 31st deadline to reach a tentative contract with Massachusetts. Massachusetts Department of Energy Resources, DOER, Commissioner Elizabeth Mahoney said in court filings earlier this year that the continuation of the wind directive is an impediment to South Coast Wind executing an agreement with the state. South Coast Wind CEO Michael Brown, in a separate filing, previously told the court that without the resolution, it may be impossible for the parties to execute the power purchase agreements, and the company will be forced to abandon negotiations with Massachusetts and Rhode Island. Since that declaration, the project has lost Rhode Island, with the state confirming last week that it has dropped out of negotiations due to federal uncertainty. The Ocean State had planned to purchase only 200 megawatts of the 1,200 megawatt project. Asked if Massachusetts would be willing to buy all 1,200 megawatts, a DOER spokesperson did not directly address the question and then declined comment. Massachusetts is continuing contract negotiations with the selected projects. Massachusetts is pursuing an all-of-the-above approach, including offshore wind, to bring more energy into the state to meet rising demand. As the wind memo remains under review and in effect, the offshore wind industry, particularly planned projects, has stalled significantly. After projects that are under construction are completed, it's unclear if the next phase in the pipeline will start installation under the Trump administration. Attorney generals from the following states are challenging the wind memo through this suit, filed in May: Arizona, California, Colorado, Connecticut, Delaware, Illinois, Maine, Maryland, Massachusetts, Michigan, Minnesota, New Jersey, New York, New Mexico, Oregon, Rhode Island, and Washington. The District of Columbia is also a party. At the close of Tuesday's hearings, which lasted an hour, Sarah said she felt she had a better grasp on the case after oral arguments, but gave no indication as to when she might issue a ruling. Housing. Less parking, more housing. 2 zoning proposals headed to City Council. Mayor John Mitchell's new strategy to address the city's housing crisis is a pair of proposals to slash parking requirements for new apartment buildings and make it easier to build on small lots. But skeptical city councilors may question his plans. Current city zoning requires builders to set aside at least 2 off-street parking spaces for every home in a new project. That means a 10-unit apartment building would need a garage or parking lot with at least 20 spaces. Developers say it's an unnecessarily high standard and it contributes to higher housing costs. The mayor's proposal would reduce the minimum to 1 space per unit for apartments with less than 3 bedrooms. The current zoning would stay in place for those larger apartments, single-family homes, and duplexes. Commercial properties will also get significant reductions in their parking requirements. Planners say lowering parking requirements is tied to economic development and solving the city's housing crisis. That's space that's getting devoted to storing a car as opposed to housing a person, Assistant City Planner Michael McCarthy said. Mitchell's other proposal is designed to add more housing on vacant lots throughout the city. Many of these lots once had homes on them, but the buildings were lost to fires or abandonment, and restrictive zoning made it illegal to rebuild what used to be there. For more than a year, city planners have been rolling out a series of zoning reforms designed to spur new housing construction and economic development. They were originally promised in Mitchell's Building New Bedford housing plan announced in 2023. The city has created a simpler permitting process for small developments, cleaned up confusing parts of the city code, and set up transit-oriented zoning districts that allow for dense development near the city's MBTA stations. The two new proposals build on those changes, city planners say. The City Council will decide whether to pass the ordinances, potentially with amendments. The Ordinance Committee is scheduled to take up the proposal on November 20th. Councilors are likely to have concerns about the parking proposal. Some have said parking is already tight in the city and they would hesitate to pass significant citywide changes. Councilor Ryan Pereira, chair of the committee, said he supports the parking proposal but expects the infill ordinance to be heavily debated. The planning board gave a positive recommendation on both ordinances at its November 12th meeting. New Bedford is not alone in revisiting its zoning code, said Eliza Raposa, a city resident and housing researcher at the think tank Mass Inc. It's a growing movement to try to address the cost of housing production by right-sizing the amount of parking you need, she said. In the last few years, some Massachusetts cities have eliminated parking minimums for new apartment buildings. Most of the state's gateway cities now have smaller zoning restrictions that only require one space or fewer per apartment, Raposa's research has found. In New Bedford, where buildable land is limited, unused parking spots are an expensive waste of space, Raposa said. The proposed ordinance would also create specific criteria that the planning board would use when considering whether to grant a further parking reduction beyond the zoning change. It would instruct the board to consider more creative strategies to manage parking demand and encourage other forms of transportation. It would also instruct board members to consider industry standards from professional organizations like the Institute of Transportation Engineers. Planners acknowledge that some residents feel like there already isn't enough parking in the city, but Lauro said she didn't expect enough new construction in parking-strapped neighborhoods for the proposal to make a significant impact there. Planners emphasize that the proposal does not stop developers from providing more parking than required. And that is all I have time for today. Those were articles from the New Bedford Light for November 20th.